30,000 feet above Germany, the air is thin, the cold is deadly, and the silence is a lie. On January 11th, 1944, Major James Howard looked down from his cockpit and saw a massacre about to happen. Below him, 60 American B-17 bombers were lumbering through the sky, slow, heavy, and completely alone. They were naked, no escorts, no protection. And closing in on them was the entire might of the Luftwaffe. Howard counted the enemy shapes diving from the sun. 10, 20, 30. 30 German fighters, heavily armed, experienced, and hungry. They were flying Focke-Wulf 190 seconds and Messerschmitt 109 seconds machines built to tear bombers apart. Howard looked at his own wingmen. There was no one. Through a mix of bad weather and confusion, his squadron had been scattered. He was the only fighter pilot left in the sky to protect those 600 men inside the bombers. He was flying a P-51 Mustang, a plane that just a few weeks ago military leadership had laughed at. They called it fragile. They called it a racer, not a fighter. They said sending a single-engine plane this deep into Germany was suicidal. The generals had mocked it. The Germans ignored it. But in the next 30 minutes, James Howard would do something that defied physics, logic, and the instinct for survival. He would take that suicidal plane and throw it directly into the teeth of 30 enemy killers. This is the story of the day one man decided that if he was going to die, he was going to take the entire German Air Force with him. To understand why this moment was so impossible, you have to understand the fear. That was choking the 8th Air Force in the winter of 1943. They called it the meat grinder. For months, American bombers had been flying into Germany during the day. The strategy was simple: bomb their factories, destroy their war machine. But the cost was horrifying. The bombers were getting slaughtered. In October alone, during a disastrous mission to Schweinfurt, 60 bombers were shot down in a single afternoon. That's 600 men, fathers, brothers, sons erased from existence in a few hours. The crews called it Black Thursday. The morale at the bases in England was shattered. Men would pack their bags before a mission because they didn't expect to come back to unpack them. The problem was simple: the bombers had no friends. The American fighter planes at the time, the P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, were heavy, thirsty beasts. They could escort the bombers part of the way, maybe to the French border, but then they had to turn back. They didn't have the fuel range. The moment the American fighters turned around to go home, the German pilots would be waiting. It was like wolves waiting for the sheepdogs to leave. They would descend on the bomber formations and tear them to pieces. The losses were so bad that the American generals considered stopping daylight bombing entirely. They needed a miracle. What they got was a plane nobody wanted. The P-51 Mustang wasn't supposed to be a heavy hitter. It was sleek, lightweight, and powered by a British Merlin engine. To the rugged American pilots used to the massive, tank-like P-47 Thunderbolt, the Mustang looked like a toy. It had a liquid-cooled engine, which was a huge risk. One bullet in the cooling system, the engine seizes, and you're a glider behind enemy lines. When the first Mustangs arrived in England with the 354th Fighter Group, the brass was skeptical. They looked at the thin wings and the fragile radiator scoop under the belly and shook their heads. They mocked the idea that this delicate machine could survive the brutal skies over Berlin. They said it couldn't take a hit. They said the range numbers were theoretical. They were sending these pilots to their deaths. But James Howard wasn't your average pilot, and he didn't care about theories. He was 33 years old, an old man in a game played by 20-year-olds. He had cut his teeth flying with the legendary Flying Tigers in China. He knew what it was like to fly outnumbered. He knew what it was like to fly inferior equipment against a superior enemy. On January 11th, the mission was to hit the aircraft factories at Oschatlieben. It was a deep strike. Dangerous. The weather was terrible. Clouds stacked up like mountains, hiding landmarks and confusing navigators. As the massive formation of bombers pushed toward the target, the escort fighters struggled to stay organized. In the chaos of the clouds, radio discipline broke down. Flights got separated. Major Howard checked his position. He was leading a flight of 4 Mustangs, but when he looked around, the sky was empty. His wingmen were gone. chasing a different engagement or lost in the soup. He was 4 miles above the earth, deep inside Nazi Germany, completely alone. Then he saw them. Below him, the 401st Bomb Group was trudging along, and swarming around them like angry hornets were the German interceptors. The Luftwaffe had launched everything they had. They had been tracking the bombers for 18 minutes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was it. The German pilots were the elite. These weren't rookies. They were expert and aces with iron crosses around their necks. They saw the bombers alone, and they knew it was going to be a turkey shoot. They formed up in groups, ready to slash through the American formation. Inside the bombers, the crews were terrified. They watched the German fighters lining up. They checked their watches. They were 37 minutes away from friendly airspace. 37 minutes of hell. They knew the math. Without fighter cover, they wouldn't make it. Gunners in the B-17s gripped their handles, sweating despite the freezing cold. They watched the black specks turning into fighter planes, wings flashing as they banked for the attack. Up above, James Howard had a choice. Standard military doctrine was crystal clear: never engage when outnumbered more than 2 to 1. It was suicide. Howard was looking at 30 to 1 odds. He had roughly 90 minutes of fuel left. He was cold, tired, and alone. If he turned around now, nobody would blame him. He could fly back to England, land safely, and drink warm coffee in the mess hall. He could live, or he could dive. He checked his guns. 4 .50 caliber machine guns in the wings. He checked his altitude. He had the advantage. He looked at the bombers, the big friends, as the fighter pilots called them. He thought about the 10 men inside each of those aluminum tubes. Howard didn't touch his radio. He didn't call for help because there was no one to hear him. He pushed the stick forward. The P-51's nose dropped. The engine roared as the speed built up. 300 miles per hour. 350, 400. The wind noise became a scream. He was coming down right, on top of a Focke-Wulf 190. The German pilot never saw him. He was too focused on the easy kill in front of him. Howard waited. He held his fire. He needed to be sure. At 200 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The Mustang shuddered as the heavy machine guns unleashed a stream of hot lead. The bullet soared through the Focke-Wulf's tail. The German fighter snapped violently, smoke pouring from the engine, and tumbled out of the sky. 1 down, 29 to go. Howard didn't watch it fall. He yanked back on the stick, pulling massive G-forces. His vision grayed out for a split second as blood drained from his head, but he fought through it. He used the momentum to zoom back up, trading speed for altitude. He rolled the plane over and looked down. He had disrupted their first pass, but now they knew he was there, or at least they thought a squadron was there. The German pilots looked up, scanning the sky. They saw a Mustang diving, firing, and climbing away. They assumed it was the lead plane of a full American attack force. They broke formation, turning to face the threat. But there was no force. There was just James Howard. He picked his next target, a Messerschmitt, 109. The Germans saw him this time. The enemy pilot pulled up, trying to meet Howard head-on. It was a game of chicken at a combined speed of 800 miles per hour. Howard didn't flinch. He held his line. The German lost his nerve and broke left. Big mistake. Howard kicked the rudder and slid in behind him. A short burst. The 109 feet's canopy shattered. Glass and metal sparkled in the cold sunlight as the plane disintegrated. 2 down. But now, the element of surprise was gone. The Germans realized something strange. They weren't seeing other Mustangs. They weren't seeing a formation. They were seeing one silver plane dancing like a maniac through their ranks. Howard was now in the middle of a beehive. Tracers were flying past his canopy. He was fighting on instinct alone. Dive. Fire. Climb. Roll. Inside the B-17 named Little Chum, the crew watched in disbelief. They had seen escorts fight before, but never like this. Usually the fighters stayed close, defensive. This guy was an aggressor. He was hunting them. But the odds were catching up. Howard checked his ammo. He checked his fuel. The fight had barely started. He was burning through both at an alarming rate. And the Germans were getting organized. They stopped looking for the rest of the squadron and focused everything on the single pest that was stopping their slaughter. 15 German fighters peeled off to deal with Howard personally. 15 against 1. They circled him like sharks. They came from above, from below, from the sides. They wanted to box him in. They wanted to crush this arrogant American who dared to fly a suicidal plane into their backyard. Howard's hands were freezing. The heater in his cockpit had failed. It was 40 degrees below zero. But he was sweating. He saw 2 fighters coming at him from the front, guns blazing. He saw 3 more diving from the sun. Most men would have panicked. Most men would have dived for the ground and run for home. James Howard tightened his grip on the stick. He wasn't going anywhere. The sky over Oschersleben had become a gladiator arena. 15 German fighters against 1 American Mustang. The math was simple. It was a death sentence. But Major James Howard wasn't doing math. He was flying on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. The German pilots, veterans of the Eastern Front and the Channel battles, knew exactly how to handle a lone enemy. They split up. They coordinated. They were like a pack of wolves cutting off an elk. 2 fighters swung wide to the left, 2 to the right, while 4 more climbed high to dive on him from above. They were building a trap, a kill box. Howard saw it forming. His eyes darted from the instrument panel to the canopy mirrors. He knew that if he flew straight for more than 5 seconds, he was dead. He did the unexpected. Instead of turning away from the trap, he turned into it. He slammed the throttle forward, the Merlin engine screaming at nearly 3,000 horsepower. He banked hard toward the 2 fighters on his left. They were expecting him to run, to be defensive. They weren't expecting a head-on charge. The closure rate was over 700 miles per hour. It happens faster than you can blink. You see a black dot, then a shape, then the flash of muzzle fire, and then you're past them. Howard pressed his trigger. The heavy .50 caliber machine guns in his wings roared. Tracers lashed out like fiery whips. The lead German pilot flinched. It's a terrifying thing to see a propeller spinning toward your face with guns blazing. The German broke formation, diving away to save his skin. Howard didn't follow. He couldn't. Following a target down meant leaving his back exposed to the other 12 wolves. He pulled the stick back into his stomach. The G-forces hit him like a physical blow. 5 Gs, 6 Gs. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The blood rushed from his head to his feet. His vision tunneled. The blue sky turned grey, the edges of his sight going black. He fought the blackout, gritting his teeth, forcing air into his lungs. He shot upward like a rocket, trading that massive speed for altitude. The P-51 Mustang climbed like an angel. The German Messerschmitts, heavier and clunkier at this speed, stalled out trying to follow him. He was above them again. He had energy. He had the advantage. But the plane was starting to fight him. Up at 24,000 feet. The air was minus 42 degrees. The metal of his aircraft was freezing. The grease on the gun mechanisms was thickening into glue. As he lined up his next target, a Focke-Wulf 190 that had made the mistake of flying straight and level, Howard squeezed the trigger. Thump, 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 silence. The plane yawed violently to the left. His right outboard gun had stopped firing. A jam. In a dogfight, a jammed gun isn't just an annoyance, it's a catastrophe. It throws off your aim, unbalances the aircraft, and cuts your firepower. Howard cursed behind his oxygen mask. He had come this far, defied these odds, and now his own machine was failing him. He cleared the jam mentally, compensating with a rudder. He still had 3 guns. That was enough. He dropped onto the Focke-Wulf's tail. This time, the German pilot never knew what hit him. A 3-second burst shredded the enemy's right wing. The fighter snapped into a violent spin, plummeting toward the cloud deck miles below. 4 down. Below him, inside the B-17 bombers, the crews were watching the show of a lifetime. Staff Sergeant William Thompson was curled up in the ball turret of a bomber named Little Chum. He was hanging from the belly of the plane, suspended in a glass bubble, watching the war upside down. He had the best seat in the house for the impossible. Thompson had flown 19 missions. He had seen brave men die. He had seen escorts turn back. But he had never seen anything like this. Who is that guy? The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding stunned. I don't know, Thompson replied, his eyes glued to the silver Mustang, weaving through the swarm of black crosses. But he's fighting like a wild man. To the bomber crews, Howard wasn't just a pilot. He was a guardian angel. Every time a German fighter tried to line up a shot on the bombers, Howard was there. He would dive across their noses, forcing them to break off. He was disrupting their aim, ruining their runs, making them panic. He wasn't just killing them, he was terrifying them. But the Germans were smart. They realized that chasing this lone Mustang was costing them time and fuel. They changed tactics. The German leader signaled his flight. Ignore the Mustang. Go for the bombers. 8 Focke-Wulfs broke away from the Dogfight and dove toward the lead bomber squadron. They were going to massacre the B-17s while Howard was busy with the others. Howard saw the split. He was exhausted. His arms ached from wrestling the stick against the G-forces. His neck was raw from twisting to check his 6. But when he saw those fighters diving on the big friends, instinct took over. He ignored the fighters behind him. He rolled inverted and dove. The P-51 Mustang had a dangerous secret. It was sleek and fast, but if you pushed it too hard in a dive, the air rushed over the wings so fast it created shock waves. It was called compressibility. The controls would lock up. The stick would feel like it was set in concrete. You couldn't pull out. You would ride the plane straight into the ground at 500 miles per hour. Howard pushed the nose down. The speed indicator wound up past the red line, 450, 480. The plane began to shudder. The stick vibrated in his numb hands. He was flirting with the sound barrier in a propeller plane. He caught the lead German fighter just as it was opening fire on a bomber. Howard unleashed a stream of tracers. He didn't even check to see if he hit. He just needed to scare them. It worked. The German leader saw the silver flash screaming down from above and panicked. He yanked his plane to the right to avoid a collision. The formation scattered. The attack on the bombers was broken. Howard hauled back on the stick. The controls felt heavy, sluggish. For a terrifying second, the plane didn't respond. The ground was rushing up. Then, the air bit into the elevators. The nose groaned upward. The wings bent under the strain, rivets popping, metal screaming. He leveled out, his chest heaving. But the price of that dive was high. He checked his ammunition counters. He had started with huge belts of bullets. Now the counters were dropping into the red. 200 rounds left per gun, maybe less. And the guns were getting worse. The extreme cold was seizing the mechanisms one by one. His left inboard gun sputtered and died. 2 guns left. Half his ammo gone. And there were still 25 German fighters in the sky. The Germans regrouped. They were angry now. This wasn't war anymore. It was an embarrassment. One American was making a mockery of the Luftwaffe. They decided to end it. No more fancy flying. No more tactics. They would use brute force. They formed a line abreast a wall of aircraft and came at him. They were going to smother him with firepower. Howard looked at his fuel gauge. The needle was bouncing near the empty mark on his main tanks. He had maybe 20 minutes of flying time left before his engine coughed and died. He looked at the bombers. They were still miles from the border, miles from safety. If he left now, he survived. He went home a hero with 4 kills. But the moment he left, those bombers would burn. Major James Howard tightened his harness. He tapped the glass of the fuel gauge, praying the needle was wrong. He gripped the stick with hands that could barely feel the controls. He turned his nose directly toward the wall of German fighters. He was out of time. He was running out of bullets. He was running out of fuel. But he wasn't done yet. The sky became a blur of spinning propellers and terrifying noise. Howard drove his Mustang straight into the center of the German line. It was a game of chicken played at altitudes where the air was too thin to breathe. He picked the center aircraft, a Messerschmitt 109, and held his trigger down. The last of his ammunition rattled through the barrels. He watched his tracers, those bright lines of burning magnesium arc through the freezing air. They smashed into the German fighter's wing root. There was a flash of orange fire, a puff of black smoke, and the enemy plane sheared apart. An explosion at 23,000 feet. The German formation shattered. The wall of steel broke apart as pilots yanked their sticks to avoid the debris of their wingman. Howard shot through the gap, flying through the smoke of his latest kill. He pulled up, banking hard to the right, his chest heaving against the harness. He checked his guns. Click. He squeezed the trigger again. Nothing. Click. Silence. He looked at the ammunition counters on his wings. They read 0. He was Winchester. In pilot terms, that means you are empty, you are toothless, you are flying a piece of metal with no way to hurt the enemy. At that moment, logic dictated that James Howard should go home. He had shot down at least 4, maybe 5 enemy aircraft. He had broken up the attacks. He had done his duty. He had no bullets, his fuel was critical, and his oxygen system was struggling to keep him conscious. But below him, the bombers were still 12 minutes away from the border. 12 minutes is an eternity in aerial combat. If he left now, the surviving German fighters would reform. They would realize the sheepdog was gone, and they would butcher the flock. Howard looked at the swarm of swastika-painted fighters regrouping behind him. There were still nearly 20 of them. They were angry, they were embarrassed, and they were coming back. Howard made a decision that makes no sense to a rational mind. He decided to stay. He realized something about the psychology of fear. The German pilot didn't know he was empty. They didn't know his guns were frozen useless. All they knew was that this silver demon had been killing them for 20 minutes. They were scared of him. He could use that. He turned his unarmed P-51 back toward the enemy. He spotted a Focke-Wulf 190 lining up for a run on a straggling bomber. Howard pushed his throttle to the stop, diving from above. He screamed down on the German's tail, closing the distance rapidly. Usually, this is when you fire. You send a burst of lead to tear the enemy apart. Howard didn't fire. He couldn't. Instead, he flew his propeller within 20 feet of the German's tail. He filled the enemy pilot's rearview mirror with the terrifying image of a Mustang closing in for the kill. The German pilot panicked. He saw the American on his 6, assumed bullets were milliseconds away, and broke hard to the left, abandoning his attack run. He dove for the safety of the clouds, running for his life from a plane that couldn't hurt him. It worked. Howard pulled up, grinning behind his oxygen mask. He was fighting with a bluff. He was playing poker with his life. But the game was getting harder. The physical toll was mounting. The heater had been dead for half an hour. His hands were numb blocks of ice inside his leather gloves. His feet felt like they didn't belong to him. Worse was the oxygen. The regulator was malfunctioning. He wasn't getting enough air. Hypoxia oxygen starvation was creeping in. It starts as a tingling in the fingertips. Then your vision narrows. Then you start to feel strangely happy, detached, like you're dreaming. Then you pass out and die. Howard shook his head violently, trying to clear the fog. Focus. Stay awake. He saw another pair of Messerschmitts diving on the lead bomber squadron. He didn't have the altitude for a dive. He didn't have the speed. He had to attack them from below. He climbed up underneath them, putting his Mustang right in their flight path. He was presenting himself as a target, forcing them to deal with him instead of the bombers. The German leader saw him coming. This time, the German didn't break. He held his course. He knew the American should have fired by now. Howard flew straight at him. He was going to ram him if he had to. It was the ultimate game of nerves, 2 planes closing at combined speeds of 600 miles per hour. At the last possible second, instinct overrode discipline. The German pilot flinched. He jerked his stick to the right, spoiling his aim, scattering his wingmen. Howard flashed past them, so close he could see the rivets on their fuselages. He was flying on fumes now. The fuel gauge was a terrifying sight. The main tanks were dry. He was running on the reserves. He had maybe 10 minutes of flight time left before the engine would sputter and silence would swallow him. And the Germans were starting to figure it out. They were smart men. They realized this Mustang hadn't fired a shot in 5 minutes. It was just diving, twisting and turning. It was a paper tiger. The radio chatter between the German pilots must have been frantic. He's empty. He has nothing. Kill him. They stopped splitting up. They stopped falling for the bluffs. They converged on him. 17 fighters turned their attention solely to James Howard. They wanted his blood. They surrounded him. Fighters above, fighters below. They were herding him, cutting off his escape routes. Bullets started to find him. A 20mm cannon shell punched through his left wing, missing the fuel tank by inches. If it had hit the tank, Howard would have been a fireball. Another round tore through his tail stabilizer. The aircraft shuddered. The controls felt mushy and unresponsive. He was flying a wreck. He was unarmed. He was out of gas, and he was alone against 17 killers. Inside the bombers, the crews watched in horror. They saw the Mustang getting swarmed. They saw the smoke trailing from its wing. "He's done," a waist gunner shouted over the interphone. "They've got him." But Howard wouldn't die. He threw the Mustang into a violent skid, kicking the rudder pedal to the floor. The plane slipped sideways through the air, ruining the German aim. Tracers zipped past his canopy, missing him by feet. He rolled inverted, diving toward the cloud deck, disappearing into the white mist. The Germans followed, firing blindly into the clouds. 10 seconds later, Howard popped out of the clouds 3,000 feet lower, pulling up hard. He was behind them again. He had no bullets, but he chased them anyway. He latched onto the tail of a straggler, chasing him down, forcing the German to dive away just to shake him. It was madness. It was impossible. He checked the clock. 11:43 a.m. He had been fighting for nearly 30 minutes. The border was close. He could see the coastline in the distance through the haze. But his engine coughed. A hesitation, a sputter. His heart stopped. Fuel starvation. He reached down with a frozen hand and adjusted the mixture control, leaning it out, trying to squeeze every last drop of vapor from the tanks. The engine caught again, humming smoothly, but it was a warning. The clock had run out. He looked back. The Germans were lining up for one final crushing attack. They were done playing. They were going to finish this. Howard gripped the stick. He was too low to dive. He was too slow to run. He had nowhere left to go. This was the end. James Howard knew it. There are moments in war when skill doesn't matter anymore, when luck runs out, and all that's left is physics. 17 German fighters were bearing down on him. He had no speed to dodge them. He had no bullets to scare them. He had no fuel to outrun them. He was a floating target in a glass cage. He gripped the stick, his knuckles white inside the leather gloves. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't pray. He just pointed the nose of his battered Mustang at the lead German fighter and waited for the darkness. The German leader leveled his wings. He had the American dead to rights. His thumb hovered over the firing button. Then he hesitated. The German pilot banked hard to the left. Then the next one turned. Then the whole formation broke apart, scattering like leaves in a storm, diving away toward the east, back toward Germany. Howard blinked, confused. He was alive. Why were they running? He craned his neck, fighting the stiffness in his spine, and looked behind him. And then he saw them, coming out of the western sun. Diving like heavy iron anvils, were the distinct shapes of P-47 Thunderbolts. They were painted with white identification stripes, their massive radial engines roaring. The cavalry had arrived. The relief force, the 401st Fighter Group, had finally shown up. They were fresh, fully loaded with ammo, and looking for a fight. The German pilots, low on fuel and ammunition after battling Howard for half an hour, took one look at the incoming American reinforcements and decided the game was over. They fled. Howard watched the Thunderbolt scream past him, chasing the retreating Germans. One of the P-47 pilots pulled up alongside Howard's wing. He rocked his wings a salute, a gesture of respect. Howard tried to wave back, but his arm felt like lead. He just nodded. The adrenaline that had kept him alive for 37 minutes suddenly drained away, leaving him shaking. His body crashed. The cold rushed in. The exhaustion was so heavy it felt like he was being crushed into his seat. He looked down at the bombers. The B-17s were crossing the border now. They were safe. Every single one of them. 60 bombers. 600 men. Not one had been shot down during his watch. But the mission wasn't over for Howard. He still had to get down. He checked his fuel gauge again. It was worse than he thought. The needle was dead on the peg. He was flying on fumes. He leaned the fuel mixture out as far as he dared, trying to sip the gasoline. The flight back across the English Channel was a blur. Anxiety. Every minute he expected the engine to cough and die, sending him into the freezing grey water below. He didn't have enough altitude to glide to shore. If the engine quit, he was swimming. He crossed the English coast at 12:23 p.m. The white cliffs of Dover looked like heaven. He radioed the tower at RAF Boxted. His voice was raspy, dry, coming in, heavy damage, Low fuel. He didn't have enough gas for a go-around. He had one shot at the landing. He dropped the landing gear. Thunk, thunk. Green lights. The gear was down and locked. He lined up with a runway. The Mustang floated over the grass, the Merlin engine murmuring quietly. He touched down. The tires chirped against the concrete. He let the plane roll to a stop near the hardstand. He didn't taxi to his spot. He couldn't. He shut the engine down right there. The propeller spun to a halt. Silence. After the roar of the engine, the scream of the wind, and the rattle of machine guns, the silence was deafening. It rang in his ears. Ground crews came running. They had heard the radio chatter. They knew something big had happened. They scrambled onto the wing to help him out. They slid the canopy back. "Major, you okay?" His crew chief, Technical Sergeant Henry Rudowski, asked, peering into the cockpit. Howard sat there for a long 10 seconds, staring at the instrument panel. He couldn't feel his legs. He tried to unclip his harness, but his fingers wouldn't work. The crew chief had to reach in and do it for him. They helped him climb out. His knees buckled as his boots hit the tarmac. 2 men grabbed him by the arms to hold him up. "I'm okay," Howard whispered. "I'm okay." He leaned against the fuselage, sipping a cup of hot coffee someone shoved into his hand, while Rudowski walked around the plane. The sergeant's face went pale. He started counting. 1, 2, 3. He found a hole the size of a fist in the left wing. He found the horizontal stabilizer shredded. He found bullet holes in the fuselage, the canopy, the propeller blades. 37, Rudowski said quietly. 37 bullet holes, Major. He pointed to a hole near the wing root. "This one missed your fuel tank by 6 inches. If that hits, you explode." Howard just nodded. He didn't care about the holes. He cared about the men he saw climbing out of the bombers landing at the nearby base. Meanwhile, at the bomber base, the B-17 crews were landing. They were exhausted, frozen, and traumatized. But they were alive, and they were all asking the same question. The intelligence officers were trying to debrief the crews, but the men wouldn't talk about the target. They wouldn't talk about the flak. They only wanted to talk about the Mustang. "Who was he?" asked Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a B-17 pilot. "I want to know who that pilot was. He saved our lives." "He took on the whole Luftwaffe," said a bald turret gunner, his eyes wide. "I counted 6 attacks. Then 10. Then I lost count. He never left us." The intelligence officer frowned. "You mean a squadron? A flight of Mustangs?" "No, sir," the gunner said firmly. "One plane, one pilot. Alone." The officer didn't believe it. It was impossible. No single fighter pilot fights 30 Germans for 30 minutes and survives. It sounded like a tall tale, the kind of story airmen make up when they're stressed. So the 8th Air Force launched an official investigation. They pulled the flight logs. They pulled the gun camera footage. They interviewed 18 different bomber crews separately. They all told the exact same story. The investigators traced the call sign to the 354th Fighter Group. They found the plane with 37 holes in it. They found the pilot who had to be carried out of his cockpit. When they developed Howard's gun camera film, the footage confirmed everything. It showed him diving on Focke-Wulfs. It showed him shredding Messerschmitts. It showed him fighting until the film ran out. The news traveled up the chain of command like lightning. It went from the base commander to the general of the Air Force. 2 days later, Lieutenant General Ira Eaker, the head of the 8th Air Force, drove to Howard's base personally. He wanted to meet the man who had done the impossible. He found Howard in the mess hall, eating breakfast like nothing had happened. Eaker sat down. "Major," the general said, "I've read the reports. I've seen the film. I have never seen a clearer case for the Medal of Honor in my life." James Howard put down his coffee. He looked uncomfortable. He wasn't a man who liked the spotlight. "Sir," Howard said, "I was just doing my job. I saw they were in trouble, and I did what I could." "You did a hell of a lot more than your job, son," Eaker replied. But there was one thing Howard didn't know yet. The bomber crews, the men he had saved, were not content with just a report. They wanted to say thank you, and they were coming to find him. 7 days after the mission, a convoy of trucks rumbled through the gates of RAF Boxted. They didn't carry supplies, and they didn't carry VIPs. They carried the flight crews of the 401st Bomb Group. These were the men from the B-17 seconds, the pilots, the navigators, and the gunner, who had spent 37 minutes watching a single Silver Angel keep the devil at bay. They had tracked James Howard down. They needed to see him. They needed to know he was real. When they found him, Howard was standing near the flight line, looking ordinary. He wasn't a giant. He wasn't boasting. He was just a quiet, 33-year-old man in a leather jacket. The meeting was raw. There were no speeches. There was no military formality. Men walked up to him with tears in their eyes. They shook his hand and refused to let go. Staff Sergeant William Thompson, the bald turret gunner who had watched the whole fight from his glass bubble, pushed through the crowd. He looked at Howard, the man who had placed his own body between Thompson and 20mm cannon. Fire. I counted them, Thompson told him, his voice shaking. I counted every time you came back. You should have died up there, Major. Howard just shrugged, a small, tired smile on his face. I saw you guys were in a tight spot, he said. Thompson survived the war. He went home to Pennsylvania, married, and had a son. He named the boy James. 6 weeks later, the entire base stood at attention. A general pinned the Medal of Honor around James Howard's neck. The citation spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. He was the only fighter pilot in the entire European theater of the war to receive the Medal of Honor, but he didn't get it because he shot down German planes. Aces did that every day. He got it because he refused to leave. He got it because 600 families got their sons back. The impact of that 37-minute fight went far beyond the medal. It changed the war. Before January 11th, American fighter pilots were told to stay close to the bombers, to act like defensive shields. It was a passive strategy that let the Germans dictate the fight. Howard proved that was wrong. He proved that a P-51 Mustang could go deep into Germany, hunt the enemy, and win against impossible odds. The doctrine changed overnight. The order went out, pursue and destroy. The Mustangs were unleashed. They stopped being sheepdogs and became wolves. They hunted the Luftwaffe over their own airfields. They broke the back of the German Air Force. By the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe belonged to the Allies, and it started with one man deciding to turn back into the fight when his gaslight was on. James Howard survived the war. He became a test pilot, flying the first generation of jets. He eventually retired as a brigadier general. He lived a long, quiet life, passing away in 1995 at the age of 84. But his legacy isn't in the rank he held or the medal in the museum. It's in the silence of the empty chairs that didn't exist at dinner tables in 1945. It's in the children and grandchildren of the 600 airmen who came home because James Howard wouldn't go home. They called the P-51 a suicidal plane. They mocked it. But on a freezing Tuesday in January, one pilot showed the world that it's not the machine that makes the hero. It's the heart of the man inside it. Aggression, speed, and the absolute refusal to quit. That is the story of the lone Mustang. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps us share these forgotten histories. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of true valor. What would you have done in that cockpit when the guns jammed? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.